Well, thank you for having me tonight. My name's Ryan Ruth. I'm a citizen of Cleveland Heights. I am a parent of a recent Heights grad and the parent of a current Heights junior. I'm one of the members of the Lay Finance Committee. The committee has a long history in this district. The current version of the committee was constituted in December of 2018. I believe there's 4 of us here today. Myself, Adam Dew, Quatrice James, and Catherine Petrie are here. I believe Max Gerbach and James Goff had prior commitments. James Posh is our ex officio member. Our meetings are held roughly quarterly. Okay, and they are open to the public. What are we and what are we not? We are a diverse group of individuals representing a variety of interests. We have expertise, and we're chosen because of our expertise in finance, legal, and education issues. We care about the schools. I mean, that's why we applied to be on the committee. That's why we were selected. And we are an independent entity. We're not beholden to the district. We had many vigorous discussions, not vigorous, but we had many discussions with Mr. Gaynor over certain of the line items on the 5-year forecast. We had a lot of questions. In some instances, he had ready answers. In others, he went back and got back to us in future meetings. But we did have the opportunity to ask real questions of Mr. Gaynor. That said, we're not auditors or independent investigators. We did not walk around and look in school buildings. We're focused primarily on finances, and thus we looked primarily at the financial statements and financial information that the district provides. We're not an entity that focuses primarily on political considerations when we make our recommendations. We're making our recommendations based on where we think the numbers lead us and not necessarily where we think the politics would lead us. Our mission, the Lay Finance Committee's mission was defined by the board. I won't go through all of these bullet points. The 4th one, though, is that we will review the district's 5-year forecast for reasonableness and make recommendations to the board on the necessity and timing of operating levies. So we are here to make a recommendation on an operating levy. What was our process? Our first meeting was in February of this year. We've had at least 4 public meetings between then and now. We've taken a good hard look at the CAFR, which Mr. Gaynor's office prepares. We've taken a good look at the 5-year forecast. As a result of our process, I'm happy to say that the recommendations that we're making today we are making on a unanimous basis. Before getting to our specific recommendations, I don't want to belabor the point, but for those people that aren't familiar with Ohio law, and I met somebody who's lived in Cleveland Heights his whole life, or at least his whole adult life, and had no idea about House Bill 920. So I do think that some brief review of why we in this district and other districts in Ohio have to come back with operating levies is appropriate. Ohio House Bill 920 provides that except for new construction, the dollar amount collected by a school district cannot increase without the passage of a levy. Once the levy passes, except for new construction, the dollar amount that can be collected is frozen. So we expect to collect roughly $73 million in property taxes this year. That's the amount we would collect next year. Doesn't matter what happens to housing values, $73 million into the foreseeable future because of Ohio House Bill 920. I will make my presentation relatively short, but I will point you to the CHUH website. Jane Geneva, who was a prior member of this committee and I believe had given the presentation of a style that I'm giving tonight, prepared a lot of information, and that can be found on the website for those of you looking for details. So what happened last year? Cuyahoga County, as the homeowners in the audience know, reappraised our properties, and we got a notice of our new property values. Countywide, they went up an average of 11%. But because of House Bill 920, that increase in housing value doesn't change the overall amount that can be collected by the district. Here in Cleveland Heights, University Heights, we're in the light green. On average, but you can see that almost everywhere in the county the values went up. On average, in Cleveland Heights, University Heights, homes were reappraised at around 8% higher than their prior appraised value. There's a lot of ways you can look at this. If you think of, if you got an 8% raise at work, but you paid the same amount in taxes, you might consider that a tax cut. I understand that the analogy isn't completely the same for property, but if your house value goes up and you're paying the same in property taxes, at least to one line of thinking, you've gotten a tax cut. This is because the average home value went up, but the aggregate dollar amount of taxes that is raised remains flat district-wide. So because of House Bill 920, school districts have to go back on the ballot every few years. Why? To keep up with inflation. That's what this is really about. We don't get automatic increases. We have to come back to keep up with inflation. And that's what we see. Here's data on operating levies statewide for a 10 or 11-year period. You can see that, the first thing that jumps out a little bit is we had a lot more about 10 years ago. But I think if you look at the rate at which they were passing, that explains why. There were more on the ballot, but during the Great Recession, many of them were failing. Now that many more are passing, you're not seeing quite as many, but there's still quite a bit. If you consider that there's only a little over 600 school districts in the state of Ohio, that's an awful lot of levies for 600 school districts every year. If you assume about 150 districts are going to have an operating levy on the ballot in any given year, and you've got 600 districts, 600 divided by 150 is 4. So that means the average district is on the ballot about every 4 years. Are we average here? Well, of course, we're above average, but in many ways. This is maybe one area we don't want to be above average in. If you look at our averages, we have a 4-year cycle from 2000 to when the levy passage in 2000 to 2004, a 3-year cycle, a 4-year cycle, and then a 5-year cycle, the last round from 2011 to 2016. 2016 plus 4 is 2020, and that's why I'm standing at the podium here today. But this points out, statewide, we're about in the same position that many districts are statewide in looking for funding every 4 years. Sometimes we're able, we size levies for 3 years and we stretch them to 4. Sometimes we size them for 4, stretch them to 5. But we're normally back on the ballot roughly every 4 years. And this is what you see with other of our peer districts. If you look around, Shaker, Solon, Mayfield, Chagrin Falls, they're doing the same thing we're doing. We're not different or special or unique. But what do we take away from this? Being on the ballot in Ohio with an operating levy every few years is not a sign of mismanagement. It's a sign of a district trying to keep up with inflation. Plain and simple. There are some districts that avoid this. They have income taxes. About a third of the school districts in Ohio have an income tax. A lot of these are rural districts, but this is how they can have their finances rise in times of prosperity. But with Ohio House Bill 920, that's not an option when you are reliant on the property tax. So these slides explain why districts like ours are on the ballot every few years with operating levies. So let's get to today's recommendations. First, the unanimous recommendation of the Lay Finance Committee is that it is appropriate for the school board to put an operating levy on the ballot in the first half of 2020. We'll talk in a moment about the reason for the timing. Second, it's the unanimous recommendation of the Lay Finance Committee that the amount of the operating levy be set between 7.9 mils and 9.5 mils. And again, we'll get into the details behind this in a moment. A lot of what we do, and a lot of what we did with Mr. Gaynor, was look at the 5-year forecast. I guess this isn't the most visible document for some in the audience. Can we zoom?
You can zoom in the bottom right-hand corner.
Ryan, while you're zooming in, just so everybody's aware, this document is on board docs. It is available after this meeting on board docs for the date of this meeting, November, what's the date?
5th.
The 5th?
Yeah.
So if you look at the agenda for the November 5th, you can get this presentation and you can also get the 5-year forecast and the assumptions that go behind this.
Correct.
And the historical 5-year forecast going back to, I think, 2014. Is that right? So.
All right, so the first question is why are we making a recommendation to put a levy on the ballot? And I think the key factor here is, so this is the fiscal year that we're in, fiscal year 2020. If you go down to our ending cash, this is the number that's concerning. We're at $1.8 million at the end of fiscal year 2021. You know, that amount is roughly 1% of the budget of the district, a little more, but between 1 and 2%. And so, you know, that is the biggest concern, is that if we don't change something, we're going to be on the path to running out of cash. And you can see the balances go quite a bit more negative in years past that. If we don't pass a levy now, the committee, we would expect that the district and the board and administration would have to start considering cuts going into next year's school year, because you wouldn't necessarily want to just stay the course and end the 2020-2021 school year with such a low cash balance. So this is the main reason for our timing recommendation. You know, it would be best to know going into next summer whether, you know, you're going to be facing this scenario or whether the voters have passed a levy, and you can plan accordingly. What else do you see in the 5-year forecast? If you go up to state funding, and this isn't summed, but if you're looking at the receipts from state sources, you know, state funding is roughly flat. If you sum these 4 columns together, you're seeing 32, 33 million almost every year. So not only are we not getting inflationary increases from our own property taxes, we're not getting inflationary increases from the state either. State funding is flat. With the current political climate, there's no reason to believe that there's going to be any significant changes in what we see in state funding either. What else do we see? Another major impact in our district's finances are vouchers. No surprise to people that have been at these meetings in the past. You know, if you look at this line item, fiscal 2017, you see 7.5 million. This is the total voucher amount. 8.5 million, 9.9. This fiscal year, 12.4, and heading upwards. So, you know, if you consider that the state funding is flat, but we have to send more of the money that's coming in from the state out the door, really this is in essence a cut by the state when it comes to the amount of aid that they're giving to us that we actually get to keep to educate our students. So there's a real need. Our local property taxes are frozen. Our state funding is frozen or really being cut, and inflation's real. We'll get to that slide later on, but inflation in salary and wages, particularly in wages in this environment, is a real phenomenon, and we have no way to keep up without an additional levy. So that really raised the question of how long the board might want to plan for. You know, there's quite a bit of uncertainty in local, state, federal politics. We'll learn later on tonight whether we're going to have a mayor in Cleveland Heights or not in our future. But with all that uncertainty, we sought to recommend an amount that was maybe a little more short-term focused. We weren't trying to project out 5, 6, 7 years. We looked at a number that would shore up district financing for this fiscal year and the 3 following. And the number that we arrived on with the assistance of Mr. Gaynor and his financial models was 7.9 mils. And so what's the intent there? The intent is to look at the fiscal year 23, where right now we would show a balance of negative 22 million, and making sure that the millage is enough to make that a positive number.
I think it needs to be noted in that 5-year forecast that those are cumulative numbers. So we're not losing 21 million in one particular school year. It's a compounded loss over a period of 3
Yes.
years.
That's an ending cash balance.
Right.
Yes, thank you. So we recommended a range on the prior slide. 7.9 was the minimum we are recommending. That said, if the board has, and administration has ideas for areas that they could cut, it's possible that you might come to a millage that's less than that. You know more than we do about some of the workings. You know, as I indicated at the start, there's limits to the role of our committee. We don't think it's our job or within our scope to kind of look for things to cut and make cut recommendations to you. That's within your purview. But if you could find cuts, there could be a reason to go under 7.9 mils. We do think there's some risk factors, which is why 7.9 isn't the only number we're giving you tonight. The first risk factor is the assumption of future cuts. The 5-year forecast that you have approved assumes that the district is going to find a new $750,000 in cuts every year, next year, and then the year after that, you have to still implement those cuts and find a new $750,000. Eventually, this is going to become difficult, if it hasn't already. So we think that's a risk factor. If you can't find all of those cuts to make, then the 7.9 mils may not be enough. Another concern is, when I pointed out the number about the cash balance at the end of fiscal year 2023, we indicated that we were trying to solve so that that number would be positive, but it is a relatively small positive number. The district, even at 7.9 mils, would be operating at a financial loss for the 3-year period if the 5-year forecast comes to fruition. That would take our cash balance down to a low number, lower than what a target would be for most districts and lower than what we would want for credit rating maintenance purposes. The third risk factor is salary and benefit assumptions. There is an error on this slide. The district assumption is that salary and wages for staff will increase at 1.5% per year. I believe the benefits assumption is slightly higher than the 1.5%. So that is an error. That should read salary and wages. But the most recent teacher's contract included a 2% raise, not a 1.5% raise. And we know the teachers union has publicly stated its belief that they should get raises of at least the 2.0%. So again, another risk factor. If teachers are given a raise above the 1.5%, then it's possible the 7.9 mils would not be enough. So we spent a lot of time looking at different scenarios. If you assume that one of these factors turns against us, you have to then project out how much it turns against you, and there was a lot of back and forth. Ultimately, we concluded that 7.9 to 9.5 was an appropriate range for our recommendation. Again, the people in this room, particularly the people up on the dais, know a lot about the impact of vouchers on this district. I'm not trying to be comprehensive here, but I think it makes sense to just point out a few things about the significant financial impact of vouchers on CHUH finances. In many districts, vouchers essentially just flow through a district. And a lot of people that take a voucher assume that's what's happening. The state is sending some money to a district, the district turns around and sends it out to the private school. The district's just a conduit. And that is true some places. That is not true here. In Cleveland Heights, every voucher is a net financial loss to the district because we do not get the full state aid from the pupil, per pupil, that we have to send out through the voucher. For the high school Ed Choice vouchers were $6,000 last year. Yet Cleveland Heights was only receiving around $2,100 or $2,200 from the state for each of these students. So essentially for each voucher student, we were losing around $3,800. Now it's true the voucher amount is less for K through 8, but still we lose money on the K through 8 voucher students as well. This year, because of the change in the law, the situation has gotten worse for us here in Cleveland Heights. Students who had previously attended private and religious schools became eligible for vouchers under certain circumstances. The high school, students that would otherwise be going to Cleveland Heights High School became eligible for vouchers for the first time. Because of the impact of the laws passed in the summer of 2019, the increased costs to the district were $2.1 million per year. And because state funding was frozen, there was no funding to offset these costs. Back to the levy amounts, 7.9 mils, what would it raise if that is what the board decides to approve? For each 1 mil in taxes, Cleveland Heights, this district collects roughly 1.1 million in additional funds. So at 7.9 mils, that would be an additional 8.8 million in funds per year through property tax collections. receipts would rise from around 73 million to 81.8. What would it cost? That's what the homeowners always want to know. Per $100,000 of assessed value, a 7.9 mil levy would cost around $277, an extra $277 per year. So here in the chart, we have some different housing values, and you can see the increase. This is for Cleveland Heights, and there can be very minor variations in this based on neighborhoods and reassessments. But this is the current projection regarding the increase. You know, going back to how I talked about how at the start, if housing values go up but your taxes stay the same, you know, that's arguably a tax cut. Before the reassessment, the average Cleveland Heights homeowner was paying around 4.13% of the value of their property in property taxes each year. You know, with the reassessment, that dropped because housing values went up, but the amount of taxes collected stayed flat. At 7.9 mils, we get almost back to where we were before the reassessment. So looking at it, in one way of looking at it is that we're putting the homeowners back to where they were on a percentage basis prior to last year's reassessment. And again, this is all about inflation at the end of the day. This is not a levy that's intended to increase the real dollars brought in by the district. It's increasing nominal dollars and trying to keep real dollars constant. Federal Reserve has said that 2% is their target inflation rate. If you think about a levy that's increasing taxes by around 7% and it's supposed to last 3 or 4 years, that's roughly 2% per year. So this really is a levy that's intended to keep up with inflation. If the levy cycle lasts 3 years, then it's slightly more than inflation. If the levy cycle lasts 4 years, then the increased taxes would be slightly less than inflation to the average homeowner. So thank you for your patience with me. Again, just to reiterate our recommendations, it's our unanimous recommendations that the school board put an operating levy on the ballot in the first half of next year, and that the amount be set between 7.9 and 9.5 mils. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Ryan, thank you all.